In this session, we're going to examine the SQ3R method and how it can be used to analyze the informational text inside each TCI lesson. So to get started, we are on the Social Studies homepage, and we're going to click on the Instruction tab, and then here at the top on Social Studies Teaching and Learning Strategies. The SQ3R method is one of our preview and reading strategies in this annotated bibliography. So you can see here, we see that SQ3R is a comprehension strategy that helps students think about the text they are reading while they're reading it. So to get started, we're going to click on Access a Google Doc. And then you can click on Use Template, and this will place a copy in your Google Drive. So let's take a look then at the SQ3R method for informational text analysis. SQ3R stands for Survey, Question, Read, Recite, and Review. So we start by surveying the text. We skim the section headings, the text, the visuals, and the graphics, and students record predictions about what they're going to learn. Then we move into the question phase, where we use the titles, the subtitles, the section headings to create inquiry questions. These kinds of questions would be things like what happened, why, and how. Then we read the text to find the answers to these inquiry questions. In the recite phase, students will highlight any central ideas, supporting details, keywords, and concepts. And then to recite, they're going to view only the question column and recite the answers to themselves. And then in the review box, we're going to summarize the central ideas and supporting details in your own words. So let's take a look at what this would look like inside of a TCI lesson. So we're inside the United States through industrialism. This is our 8th grade program. We're in lesson 8, creating the Constitution, and we're in section 2. Shays' Rebellion and the Need for Change. So when we're doing the survey phase, we're going to examine any headings, which is Shays' Rebellion and the Need for Change, as well as any subheadings, Massachusetts Farmers Rebel, and a call for convention. One of the nice things about TCI text is that it is chunked well, especially in our middle school programs. The sections are not lengthy multi-page sections here. I also noticed that I have this painting and a caption along with that. So I'm going to draw some predictions now about what I'm going to encounter. So let's take a look at this example now completed. In the survey phase, I know this section will discuss Shays' Rebellion and a need for change. That's what it's told me in the heading. From this photograph, we learned that Shays' Rebellion involved farmers in Massachusetts closing down courthouses so their land would not be taken away when they could not pay their debts. We learned that from the visual as well as from the caption. And we know in some way we're going to predict that this rebellion of farmers in Massachusetts was connected to a call for convention. Now, that's really all we know at this point because we're just previewing the text. We haven't read in detail to understand the details of this connection, but we're predicting that that connection exists because we've looked at these section headings. So next we move into the question phase. We're going to take the titles, subtitles, section headings, and we're going to create these inquiry questions. So you can see here, I've created inquiry questions, and you notice that each of these boxes is highlighted in a different color. That is intentional. So when I go over to the TCI text and I turn on my show highlights, you can see that I have highlighted the specific information that addresses each of these questions. So I'm using the same color coding system that's available to me in TCI. So you can see these are the 6 colors that are available, and they match up with each row in the graphic organizer. So that allows me to highlight information that's relevant to each of these questions, and then on the read side, I'm going to fill in this box by paraphrasing and summarizing that information. So when I look at this text, The first question I came up with was, why was there a need for change? So we know that from the major heading here that there's a need for change. And I see some information that's provided to me in these introductory paragraphs that tells me why there's a need for change. So I've highlighted that in orange so that I can move that information and paraphrase and summarize and note take over here in the graphic organizer. And the same for the remaining questions. Why did Massachusetts farmers rebel? I know that from my section heading here, so I'm going to highlight in green some of the key answers to that question. I also want to know what happened during this rebellion. And I'm going to highlight that information and then transfer it into my graphic organizer. The same for how did the rebellion lead to a call for change? That was one of my predictions, is that this rebellion somehow leads to a call for change. So I should find that information in the text somewhere, and I've highlighted that in this pink color. Then I need to know some information about the call for a convention. Why was this convention called? Highlighting that information in this blue color, and then what change happened at the convention. And I've highlighted that in this purple color. So that highlighting system works well if you're using both the digital text and the digital graphic organizer. Of course, you can use the printed text and the printed graphic organizer, or a combination of digital and print. But the highlighting scheme here is designed to use with both the digital text and the digital graphic organizer. So then I would move into the recite phase. There's nothing to write here in the recite phase, but students would only view this column. They can enlarge it on their screen to only review the left column, to ask themselves the questions and to be able to give a cogent answer based on their understanding of this text. And then finally, in the review phase, students would take and summarize the information that they've learned here. So that's what the SQ3R analysis looks like, and I can follow this up for each section. Now, it's important to note here that it's not assumed that students will be able to automatically use this SQ3R method for independent reading. SQ3R is really well designed for modeling and guided practice. So modeling being the I do phase, where the teacher would demonstrate an example going through the text and turning those questions, or those subtitles rather, into questions, and then looking for those answers. In guided practice, you could do this as a class, where you ask students to generate those questions as a class, and then we look in the text for an answer. Ultimately, we want to move to independent practice through a gradual release method. But again, it's not assumed that students should be able to automatically do that right away. I think the question creation is some of the most challenging aspects of this, because we have to know the good questions to ask. There's not necessarily always right and wrong questions, but we do have to ask good questions of the text. So when we start here, we're looking at the kinds of questions that historians ask. Now, as we go through this in our modeling, in our guided practice, we may change some of these questions. Maybe we posed a question, but as we start reading the text, we found out that there is another question that's really more important. So we can always go back and revise and change that question to say, I may have thought that who or what happened in the situation was the most important question, but as I was reading it, I figured out this is really about why this event occurred or how this event occurred. And so I go back and I change my core question to align with what I'm reading. So that kind of productive struggle with the text is something that, again, we work through modeling and through guided practice, and eventually gradually release to independent practice. So once I've done this phase, this provides me with an extra scaffold support for students as they're analyzing this text. Now, inside the TCI program, I know that underneath the text, I always have my interactive notebook. So here I have my check for understanding. Why is Shays' Rebellion an important event in American history? So if I had just read the text and were answering this question, I might have to go back a few times and figure out, why is Shays' Rebellion an important event in American history? With my note-taking process here through SQ3R, now I've been through this. I've not only predicted what Shays Rebellion is going to be connected to and related to this call for a convention, I've asked myself these questions, I've read for the answers, I've recited those answers, and I've summarized it. So when I go back to this question, this answer stands out a little bit more clearly. And I have the correct answer. It caused lawmakers to reevaluate the Articles of Confederation. Underneath that, here is my interactive notebook. And in this case, I'm going to fill in this flow chart. Now I have causes and effects of Shays Rebellion. So here's another graphic format to understand the text. But because I've used SQ3R ahead of time, I really have already broken down the text into the constituent parts that I need to complete this graphic organizer. So if I were to show the answer key and I see some possible causes listed here, all of this information is information that I've already gathered and analyzed in my SQ3R analysis. The same with my possible effects here. So SQ3R can be used in conjunction with the interactive notebook. Again, whether you're doing this paper pencil or whether you're using the digital interactive notebook and text, the two can work together to help students deconstruct each TCI section.